pass it over to Toby.
Thank you so very much, Tracy. Really appreciate being here with everyone and the invitation to do so. Before we do an arrival practice, we're going to introduce ourselves, and not a whole whip around. You all will get a chance to do that soon, but who is the RHA trio bringing this retreat workshop with you all, embodying compassionate allyship? And it's always awkward to kind of like show your own picture on the screen and you're on the screen, but I know that we're in a shared view. So I'm just going to give you one quick peek at the three of us, and you can find us on the screen. And so I am Toby, and I am here in Oakland, California, which is the traditional territory of the Ohlone Native American tribal territory. And we want to take a moment to honor the indigenous lands that we occupy. And Sally will get a chance to share her land, which is also representative of the land that MCON is hosting from. I pass this on to Grace.
Thanks. It's so good to be with everyone today. Thank you for being here. So my name is Grace, and I'm here in Ann Arbor, Michigan, which is the traditional land of the Anishinaabe.
Thank you, Grace. And I'm Sally, and I'm on the land of the Council of Three Fires, the Ojibwe, the Ottawa, and the Potawatomi peoples, which was colonized and is now called the western suburbs of Chicago, and also not far from where CASM has been founded and where Tracy is.
Thank you, Sally and Grace. So we make up the RHA trio. We always want to begin each session with an opportunity to arrive and to practice together. Because this is heartfelt work, it's also work that can be dysregulating at times, although very necessary for our growth in the spirit of humanity and what we're working towards to be more inclusive. So we just invite you to sit comfortably, to gaze down or close your eyes, and just take 3 deep breaths. Allowing yourself to really settle in for some deeper learning. And just paying attention with every in-breath and out-breath. What is present for you in this moment? What emotion is present for you? And perhaps exploring a little deeper. What emotion is underneath that emotion that's creating the first emotion you named? So what's the emotion under the emotion? Just being curious. If there's an emotion that you want to bring into this experience for our time together, I invite you to call in that emotion now for yourself. And see yourself embodying that emotion through your posture, through your language, through your affect. With each in-breath and out-breath, breathing in that emotion and exhaling the emotion. letting it become part of your awareness. Allowing it to be expressed as you. And taking a moment to express gratitude. Gratitude to yourself for giving to yourself in this way today. Gratitude to Cosm and Tracy for giving in this way today. And gratitude for this collective community for being present on this journey today. I'm going to count us down from 5 down to 1. And after 1, please take that as an opportunity to return, eyes open, fully present, cameras on. 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. I'm really appreciating too, seeing so many familiar faces in the space and people who are already branded for themselves and their mindset as racial healing allies and are here revisiting again. So it's beautiful to see you all. And we also have some new learners in the space, new allies, if you will, to this experience. So today, we will have some practices throughout our session. There's no formal break, so just take care of yourself, please, as best you can and as you need to. We're going to be exploring some systemic inequities in the big picture of it and levels of systemic disconnection. And how might we heal through connection? And then what are some of the barriers that show up on an institutional level that create further disconnection? And how do we move through that? Through connection and embodying what we call compassionate allyship. So we have a few sacred agreements that we like to use for every workshop, every session. The first is, again, self-care and safety, taking care of yourself, doing what you need to do. If that means standing up, if it means stretching, if it means yawning, moving shoulders, whatever you need to do to maintain a sense of comfort for yourself in the space. And then using the sacred pause to help regulate your own safety and the safety of others. And that sacred pause is really about taking that deep breath, taking that moment to stop, breathe, notice, reflect, then respond. So we move from a habituated response to a skillful response simply from the act of pausing. And not vilifying white people is our second agreement. That these conversations can be had without vilifying white people or any other group, and yet speaking on systemic whiteness, we have to say white quite a bit, and that often in and of itself makes white people quite uncomfortable, just to hear it over and over in a short period of time. So please pay attention to your own inner awareness and your own feeling tone around how that might be challenging for you or might feel okay for you. And if you're already triggered by it, there's learning in that as well. Please stay present, be here in this space, in this moment, and staying present also means for us minimizing chat, staying in one conversation, and again, taking those breaths as you need to be. And this is not the kind of work to dip in and out of and allow yourself to be distracted, because you will miss important parts that just help with your own embodiment and staying present. Sally, you're muted.
The next one, lean into discomfort. Goes right along with the distraction piece, right? Staying here, naming it, breathing, learn to invite the discomfort in with curiosity. And you'll come to know that pushing it away doesn't work. So leaning in is what you learn to do. Holding the complexity of others' experiences without judgment. Building that empathic muscle involves listening in that different way, that empathic way that involves not thinking of what you're going to say next. Increases our understanding, opens everything. Trusting the process. The process is extremely unique to every individual. It's unpredictable. It's not a prescribed step by step. It's important to continue to take your steps and keep going. Grace?
Thank you. So stepping away from qualifying, this is about saying what we need to say, not overthinking or auto-correcting ourselves, which I certainly find myself wanting to do sometimes, just sharing thoughtfully and from the heart and trusting that there is learning to be had there. Compassion is central to our approach and to our work today together. Compassion, not just for one another, although that's incredibly important, but also for ourselves. Self-compassion is the foundation of compassion for others. So acknowledging that all of us have been conditioned by and affected by and harmed by systemic oppression in different ways, and to turn toward ourselves and each other with kindness and care. And then confidentiality. So this is a straightforward one, hopefully, but often in these workshops, we're going to be sharing vulnerably. That's where rich learning takes place, right? When we can be vulnerable with each other, honor each other with a commitment to keep what is said and who says what in this space here. So we're going to invite you to pause here for a moment and consider this list of sacred agreements. Check in on the inside, turn toward yourself for a moment. Consider which agreement or agreements are calling to you, which ones stand out to you, which ones speak to you. As you contemplate this, if you come up with one or more, we invite you, if you'd like, to type them into the chat, the ones that stand out to you. And which in particular will you be practicing with today, this afternoon? Leaning into discomfort, compassion, trusting the process. Thank you. Say what you need to say. Yep, absolutely. Using the sacred pause. Yep, compassion, leaning into discomfort. Trusting the process, compassion, staying present, leaning into discomfort. Thank you all. Present, be here. Yeah. So we invite you to hold that commitment in your own body, in your own heart, as we move forward into our session today, centering that intention to practice with that agreement in particular.
Thank you all so much for reflecting in that way. This work, at the end of the day is about connection. It's truly about connection. And we've been disconnected from each other in very obvious physical ways throughout the pandemic. And that has caused a lot of pain and also trauma. We are social beings. We naturally long for connection. We actually need it to survive. A baby whose every need is met, but who is not held, will die. We need each other. And going a bit deeper, we've been disconnected for far longer by systems of harm, systems of oppression like racism that seek to divide and conquer, that seek to separate us so that we are less strong, less able to meet our collective needs. This disconnection has done such damage to our schools and our school system. It has caused us to even break our ethical and moral oath and imperative to children. But we can and we do reclaim our innate connection as human beings. We do this all the time. We seek connection in mutual knowing, mutual caring, by sharing our gifts and receiving each other's gifts. And we need time and space also to connect with ourselves. And for many of us, that is also hard to come by. And there's lots of reasons why: the pandemic, work responsibilities, family responsibilities, systems of harm that overemphasize productivity and underemphasize caring for self. And our system even perpetuates and tells us that we are not worthy of self-love. So to truly connect with others, we have to connect to ourselves, and reconnecting to self is always the starting place. So today we're going to talk about connection, and we're going to practice connection. And we'll see how that feels and what it means to us, but just pay attention to how connection is arising for you in different ways. We're going to get an opportunity right now to even connect with each other by just going into a breakout room, just to create some connection before we dive deeper.
So you're going to introduce yourselves, share your pronouns if you choose, why you're here today, and think for a moment. Each person, you'll be in rooms of 3, so each person will have about 3 minutes to share. Think about something that is a source of connection for you. Maybe it's a person, an idea, a practice, a thing, an experience, a place. So we will see you back. Let's do that again. Welcome back. Hopefully you got a chance to connect. We're ready to dig in and talk about systemic inequity. As a bit of an intro, we have this brilliant quote from Audre Lorde. Over 40 years ago, she wrote these words. And though prompted by Lorde and other thinkers throughout the years, we as a society have never done this before. We've never learned to to relate across our human differences as equals. So we're embarking on changes that will have a deep impact on humanity. It feels immense and important. And for those of us who spent our careers aware of these inequities, it seems almost unbelievable. Since the killing of George Floyd, everybody cares. It's really a phenomenal and ripe time in the history of social justice work in the United States. But this sense of urgency needs to be carefully managed, and we must acknowledge the fact that the quality of DEI trainings really matter. If we want to move collectively in the right direction, much like the approach we all know about, chosen to introduce mindfulness into our larger society, into our schools. The approach chosen for equity work will determine its effectiveness. We're accepting the fact that many institutions need support in ways we may not have anticipated. So it's important to name the critical dynamics at play in order to be aware of the nature of this transformative training. we'll start with taking a realistic look at some of the stubborn challenges we face in our larger society, and Toby's going to take us through some of that.
Thanks, Sally. So I know a lot of us use the word systemic, or you've been hearing the term systemic when we refer to systemic whiteness or systemic racism. And what does that actually mean when we use this word? Something that is systemic is about being inherent to the whole. It's not isolated, meaning that it's not just affecting one thing or two things, it's affecting everything. And think about systemic illness. Systemic illness doesn't just affect one part of the body, it's affecting the entire system, the entire body. So something that is systemic is fundamental. It underlies all things. It's insidious, meaning it affects all things, and its patterns and its groups, and it's socialized into us, and it's internalized by us. And it's societal, like societal illness. So when we frame whiteness or racism in this term of systemic, it helps us to move away from the myth or falsehood that racism is something that is upheld by individual racist people. It helps us to understand that every single one of us is affected. Every single one of us is conditioned by racism and systemic whiteness. And it is a part of all of our conditioning if we've been born and raised in the United States. It is the culture. And so we've designed a framework to help anchor into the deepening of understanding of systemic whiteness or white dominant culture. And we assert that it's really made up of these three parts. And so again, just when we think about culture, right? Culture is a way of life of a group of people. And it's widely accepted without question. It's passed along by communication and imitation from one generation to the next. That's what culture does. It's passed on through language, communication, behaviors, the things that we teach. White dominant culture is the same way because our society has been built and framed within white dominant culture and white lens. To make this culture thrive, it's supported by white supremacy. And I used to think of white supremacy like, oh, that's such an ugly word. And I would think of the KKK. And when I really started studying and learning more, I realized white supremacy is simply a belief. It's a belief that white people are superior to those of all other races, especially the Black race, and therefore should dominate society. No matter our racialized skin and who we are and how we walk in the world, we can all hold this belief of white supremacy. White supremacy is supported by white privilege because, gee, if you believe that you're superior in some way, then you generally have this sense of privilege. When I think of white privilege, I help you. I'm like, it's like your pop your collar moment. It's like, you know, I'm a white person. I've got all this on the basis of just my race alone, and the society caters to me. But white privilege is characterized and rooted in inequality and injustice. So for a group to be privileged, other groups must not have privilege. That's what makes it problematic. That's what makes it problematic. Not the esteem that comes with it, but the lack of esteem for others that comes with it. And then to really deepen this, well, if there's white privilege and white supremacy to keep this white dominant culture going, there's white fragility that makes it really thrive. Because white fragility is the discomfort and defensive behaviors on the part of white people when confronted by information about racial inequality and injustice. You don't even have to call anybody who's white racist. You can just talk about disaggregated data not being inclusive, and white fragility will start. It's like a domino effect. It's a triggering action to even bring up race. And that is a defensive mechanism to then stop any forward movement for a racialized coming together or conversation. All right. So this is how we continue to enact white dominant culture and how it continues to thrive. Grace is going to take us deeper.
Thanks so much, Tovi. So as Tovi is explaining what systemic means in the context of systemic whiteness or systemic racism, to better understand the way that systems relate and interrelate, we like to share this graphic. So this graphic is really based on ecosystems theory, understanding our society as an ecosystem, in that everything affects everything else. It's like a giant web of interconnection. And we can parse out levels of this system and how, in this example with what we're working with here today, how systemic whiteness or racism plays out on all those levels. We could also examine how any form of harm, any form of oppression, sexism, heterosexism, ableism, etc., plays out on these same 4 levels. So here, applying it to racism to better understand the way the system works. I just want to briefly go through each level and give some examples. So starting at the personal level, the innermost circle here, at this level, we're exploring how systemic racism operates through our beliefs, feelings, and values internally in our minds, bodies, and spirits. So at this level, we see examples like implicit bias, which all of us have, internalized dominance and or internalized oppression, stereotyped images that we have of people from different racial backgrounds based on our racial conditioning. At the second level here, the second circle, we're looking at the interpersonal or relationships. So how does systemic racism play out through our actions, our behaviors, and our language? How do we act out our internalized racial conditioning? Through things like microaggressions or acts of discrimination, storytelling or joke telling about other racial groups that effectively other groups. If we move to this third level here, we're looking at the institutional level of systemic racism. And here we see it playing out through rules, policies, practices, and procedures of our institutions. And we can see this in institutions large and small. So we could see this in the institution of healthcare in the United States, the institution of education on that broadest level, but we can also see it in our own schools, in our own workplaces, in our own community organizations. Examining schools and educational institutions here, we can see examples of institutionalized racism through institutional programming, what gets included and not included in our strategic plans, which data gets reported, and the deficit lens through which we often frame racial disparities in education. We can see it in tenure or promotion reviews. If we're looking at higher ed, we can see it in any kind of promotion in K through 12. We can see it in the curriculum and the way the curriculum is enacted. We can see it in texts and in resources and grades themselves. So there are lots of examples of how racism is playing out insidiously in our rules, policies, practices, and procedures. These are, quote unquote, ways of doing business. They are just the way we go about things and often remain hidden. If we look at this broadest level now, the largest circle here, we're looking at the societal cultural level. And this is where systemic racism shows up through what we consider as a society to be quote unquote good, quote unquote beautiful, quote unquote normal. So we can see examples of this in the images that we see in mainstream media, pictures on the covers of magazines, which features a particular image of health, which is often embodied by a white, younger, thin-looking, fit-looking person, woman, maybe. So if I see that on the cover of a health magazine, what tell me about what's considered to be the ideal of health in our society? And then if I see that on 100 magazines over the period of a year, every time I go to the grocery store, what does that teach me about where this body fits in our society? So we're taking these messages in whether we want to or not, just by what we are exposed to in mainstream media, in political discourse, in the stories we tell about our history, the stories we don't tell and don't include about our collective history. And all of this is manipulated by white dominant culture, systemic whiteness, racism. So on all four of these levels, racism as a system of harm effectively disconnects us. So we've been talking about connection, right? Racism is a form of systemic disconnection. It is very intentionally disconnecting. It's used as a tool of disconnection and has been for hundreds of years since the inception of the colonies in this country. Racism disconnects us from our belongingness, our connection to each other in a sense of belonging to a community or a group of people, which is actually required for us to be well. We're social beings, and disconnection, isolation, actually does harm to us, not just psychologically, but physiologically, can lead to illness and death. It actually creates powerful disconnection from one another based on other norms, so norms that other us from one another. It disconnects us from our ability to be our most authentic, caring selves. It disconnects us from true history, real history, the knowledge of our own people's history and of other people's history, and our ability to then repair past harms. And it disconnects us from our personal and collective power to affect change. If we are not actively opposing racism, we're being caught up in that disconnection that racism imposes on us. So this disconnection harms everybody. It harms all of us. And while absolutely racism has and continues to do much more direct and intense harm to Black and people of color, it does harm every one of us. Those of us who are white are also harmed by this systemic disconnection. Every one of our best interests to it is in every one of our best interests to intentionally challenge this disconnection by intentionally challenging the system and replacing it with systems of healing and with connection. So on that note, we're going to take a few minutes to contemplate connection and disconnection ourselves. And to feel into that, this is a workshop on embodiment. So we're inviting you to feel into this experience, to notice holistically what's going on for you, thoughts, emotions, body sensations, as you contemplate these questions. So I'll ask you to go ahead and pull out a journal or a piece of paper, something you can jot some notes down on. And we'll spend about 2 minutes with each question. So this first question that we'll reflect on together, first privately, is, what does connection feel like for you? Remember moments of connection. Think of images that arise as you come up with as you contemplate connection. Stream of consciousness, writing down, what does connection feel like for you? I'll give you 2 minutes and a bell will ring when that time is up, and we'll move on to the next question. About 30 seconds left with this question. Okay, we'll move on to the second question, and you can always return to these later if there's more for you to reflect on. The second question is, what does disconnection feel like for you? Thoughts, emotions, sensations as you imagine, you consider, you remember disconnection, experiences of disconnection. 2 minutes again to stream of consciousness, reflect on this.
Um,
About 30 more seconds with this question. All right, moving on. And moving on to the third question here. How does systemic racism create disconnection in your institution? So notice here that we're zooming out on those 4 levels, right? So we started on the personal level, considering how this felt for us. And now we're zooming out quite a bit and considering examples of disconnection in your institution based racism. Again, no wrong answers, free write, just stream of consciousness. 2 minutes to reflect on this question. About 30 seconds left. All right, so we're going to move on here. Thank you for taking these moments to reflect. Sally?
Thank you, Grace. You're going to have time now to talk in groups of 3. We'll do the same thing, each about 3 minutes. So keep an eye on the clock and share the air. Just share what came up for you in your journaling. And we will have time for whole group sharing when you.
Just give me 1 second. If you do want to speak like next, it's hard sometimes to see the raised hands. You can type in the chat up next and we'll definitely call on you. So that works too for us. All right.
Yeah. Well, it was kind of near the end of our conversation, but we were talking about connection and disconnection and how actually when you have both, it was connecting back to the pain and possibility of what we were learning earlier and being able to connect both. And when we have both, we're able to value both and see both as a strength with that. So when we were doing our shares, we were noticing just the different layers that we were bringing up and just like ending with, you know, there are different possibilities when we have both and how we build that strength so that actually they are connected, making sure it's all connected.
Thank you, Lindsay. Thank you for naming that. Miss Bear and then Dina.
Hey, I just wanted to share that like the practice of going through those questions where you felt the connection and then the disconnection and then applied it to your system was really eye-opening because like, I feel like it puts us in the place of experiencing systemic racism, because once you go through that disconnection of how we feel and then kind of apply, you know, I applied it to my school system and how my eyes have been opened this year to racism that I had not seen or heard of. And then we talked about, I think with Bunny, who was in my group, that in general, we are separated so that we aren't able to connect and understand the disconnection, if this makes sense. I don't know if I'm like making this make sense. And how this year I've been, you know, privileged to work under the first African-American woman in leadership in our county. But what that's done is really opened my eyes by supporting her and hearing all the disconnection she gets through these microaggressions and things that I just, you know, I had no idea about because our county is mostly white. And so now it's like, so it was really eye-opening to kind of go through it. And I was thinking of her and it just was really, it's sad.
Yeah, thank you so much.
But eye-opening.
Mm-hmm. Yes, thank you. Dina.
So Lindsay and I were in a group together and then Tracy popped in and we were talking about this being in those spaces. And I was just thinking back to Thich Nhat Hanh and embracing the joys and the sorrows at the same time. It's like connection and disconnection at the same time. I also had a little aha about the disconnection piece. So I feel like, you know, naturally our brain always goes to disconnection being a negative. And I actually personally am okay disconnecting once in a while, but that's under my control for the most part. When it's not under your control, I think the circumstances and your reflection on what that means to you and what those sensations come up for you is going to be dramatically different. So I had both. in reflection with that, that was fascinating to me. And just coming back to leaning into discomfort with the reality that I was so unaware growing up, and that my family was so not present with differences, and my naiveness to it. It continues to not haunt me, but it continues to bother me and kind of push me to do a lot more work like this. So I'm grateful for those questions. I continue to look forward to working with them and hearing others' reflections. Thank you.
Thank you, Dina. Cheryl.
Thank you. Thank you all. We had a very nice conversation. I think two things arose for me. One is the importance of the language of our bodies, and this idea that I can be disconnected and not notice it sometimes, be speaking with someone else and not notice that we're not connected, not appreciate it. And that in those times, I'm sure my body is telling me that's the case. And to be able to tune into what's happening physically is a really is a gift, right? We have this way of knowing. And then just the recognizing the vast difference in the feelings between connected and disconnected. I had this awareness of like why I would care. Like what if we're in this disconnected state and we know that on the other side is this ease and warmth and joy and connection and wholeness and affirmation. Like why would we not want more of that? So just this idea that if we're in this place of disconnection, there's so many, not just intellectual reasons to connect, but powerful physical, like holistic health reasons to connect. So I really appreciated that very much. And I look forward to doing this with our board. Thanks.
Thank you, Cheryl. And the system, though, and the culture itself thrives off of disconnection. That's really important for us all to understand. That that's the larger why in a lot of ways, and you know, having also the privilege to disconnect from something you're already deeply connected to, versus the lens of wanting to connect and can't connect. Those are two very different experiences. Yeah, thank you. Laura.
Toby, could you?
Toby?
Right. Yes, Hector.
Yeah, I just want to thank you for this conversation. The contrast it was just, to me, it was very emotional because it brought back feelings of being excluded, being made fun of, being humiliated, and it was okay. It was okay. There was, you know, it was growing up in East LA, that a lot of the practices, those microaggressions, really created some deep-seated feelings that these questions kind of brought them out again, and that sense of wanting to belong, but never being invited, and never being accepted, and also the adults not understanding the profound impact, the lifelong impact that has. You know, my father was a farm worker, and there is generational trauma as a result of just the exclusionary practices that he grew up with. But I just love that contrast, that conversation that we had, because it just helped, in a way, clear the air about some thoughts and feelings, and not only in the greater context, but how that self-awareness really is heightened, that we can't even let the smallest practice of disconnection be allowed to be perpetuated systemically or even interpersonally.
Absolutely, Hector. Thank you. Absolutely. And I'm appreciating the way that you all are holding this space. Like, you can still sense into some of the discomfort, you can sense into the vulnerability, you can sense into the dysregulation, all of that, and still look at us, we're in it. We're holding each other. We're honoring, even though we may even disagree, we're honoring what is being brought into the space. And this is what creates that healing. This is what creates the connection. This is the stuff that gets hard to describe and give words to because you can only feel it. Right? But we generate it. Ooh, with that, let's practice a minute. Let's just be with that. Let's be with that. So I just invite you to close your eyes or gaze down. Just take a deep breath. Just noticing how looking directly through the lens of the other can be so powerful. That our learning and unlearning is both vertical and spiral. And we are practitioners of mindfulness. So I push on us to just be in this curious space, be in this liminal space of openness. And not judging our emotions as good or bad, but sensing into our emotions so that we can generate empathy. And from our empathy, we can generate connection. Allyship. Allyship. Breathe in that word, allyship. How does it resonate in your own awareness? Allyship as a noun and a verb. A being and a doing. Black, Indigenous people of color in this space are being allies to white people by holding compassion in this learning, by holding the discomfort in this learning, by supporting in the growth. It is a love offering. White people sitting in this space also exercising courage, also learning. You all are also a love offering of goodness towards humanity. Let's just breathe that in, the shared space. Imagine, if you will, the 5 fingers on your hand grasping the lid of a jar. And the lid of the jar is stubborn, it's not budging. And all 5 of those fingers, you're holding on to that lid of the jar. Sense the challenge in your body. Now imagine the pair of your hands. The 5 fingers on both hands kind of separating, working that jar. Holding the jar, holding the lid. We're often awkwardly working to remove the stubborn lid that we put on racialized things, racialized experiences. And now see your hands holding that jar. And the hand that's on the lid of the jar starts to relieve the pressure off the stuckness of the lid. And you just feel that kind of that pop, that easefulness that comes out of your struggle to open the lid. And the lid is open. The jar is open. And you get to enjoy what is inside. Because all of the fingers have worked together. The hands have worked together. We've had an opportunity to envision these hands working together. And these very hands that can open the jar can be hands that we symbolically hold with one another. Joining hands, participating in a moment and a movement of connection, of value. Our hands joining in allyship, being a noun and a verb. Powerful in the heart. Let's just breathe in the truth that we only make real progress together, inclusively, hand in hand. When you feel ready, please open your eyes and gaze at each other and appreciate each other. And so we focus on the healing connection of allyship. But what are we up against sometimes, like the stubborn jar? If we seek the reconnection of healing allyship, where do we begin? Sally's going to name some of the main barriers to equity in our institutions and why this personal allyship can be so transformational through these institutional barriers.
Thank you, Toby. So we're back to the 4 circles. And looking at these systemic challenges and disconnection, we're going to look more specifically at barriers and more of the language we use to identify and describe them. We realize they're rooted in the culture of whiteness we all live in. The characteristics show up in us, our attitudes and behaviors, all of us. As we begin to unpack this list, please note the words and phrases in bold. So we'll go to the next slide. The words and phrases in bold on this list of barriers are actually the naming characteristics of what we call white supremacy culture. And that list appears in an article by Tikamo Kuhn, but actually that work originates from the work taken on by many different people who are bravely beginning to develop this lexicon, right? The context-specific vocabulary we are using in this work. And one could argue understanding the nuance involved in the language we use is critical. We also know for sure agreeing on this terminology, in essence, speaking the same language, is a necessary step to meaningful learning and growth, improves our awareness. And once that happens, our efforts really take transformational steps and the work becomes more powerful. So you'll see these words as you dig deeper, and we'll just unpack them briefly. Senior leadership lack knowledge, skills, and awareness. And the characteristic is for them is run one right way, right? It's hard for leaders to be vulnerable and authentic if they don't know what they're talking about. They're used to knowing things. They don't know how to approach not knowing. They have a board of directors or a school board, financial backers they need to convince. If they become honest about what they don't know, it becomes difficult for them to influence and lead. The next one, discomfort and fragility. We touched on this and have been touching on this all along. That fragility, as Toby described, really up and down the organizational chart, we see this. The privilege comes into play. It's just easier, right? The one right way, it's just more comfortable. When the fragility arises, it works to erase that discomfort. And people try to convince themselves they're not to blame. And they take this dangerous slide back to just maintaining the status quo inside of the institution. Gatekeeping, simply saying and doing things to keep race off the table. And gatekeeping is driven by a fear of open conflict. When leaders say their staff isn't ready for equity training, the translation really is that maybe the leadership aren't ready. And it happens all the time. I'm guessing you've been in meetings where there might be a rich article about poverty and race and opportunity gaps for students of color. And the takeaways for most of the group are that poverty is the key problem. The conversation doesn't happen about race. Conversations about race are the third rail. If we just don't talk about it, it doesn't exist, and we successfully avoid that conflict. And their conversations we're ill prepared to deal with. Urgency. Now, the sense of urgency becomes a confusing one for many people. Why would it be bad? Often in our trainings, we hear people say, give me the list, tell me what I can do. Urgency really, the sense of urgency is really wrapped around fixing immediately. The discomfort is so intense, and white people are used to being able to solve problems. Sadly, these urgent efforts to fix racism often result in the last two barriers. But it's this wanting to act and focus on immediate measurable goals. So like quantity over quality, the box checking trainings that happen. By winter break, everyone will be equity trained and ready to talk about race in their classrooms. We know this doesn't happen. The quantity idea makes the quality suffer, and leaders haven't taken the time to learn themselves. It's hard to facilitate this kind of deep-rooted change that racial healing involves for others. Surface level changes happen. So this equity work begins within our institutions, yet we're really unable to build capacity for deep systemic change. And in the process, we might actually be doing more harm than good. Maybe now there are some of these, after this quantity over quality training happens, maybe there are some conversations about race in the lunchroom. It doesn't mean the conversations are safe or productive. I've had numerous Black colleagues share with me over time that the equity work has actually created more hostile environments for them for many reasons. One main one being they carry the burden of being responsible to teach everyone else. It's exhausting. Pushback can result in one microaggression after another. Lots of wounding and trauma for people of color. And then that last barrier on the list, we talked about this, the risk to the institution, right? This kind of change just so profoundly threatens the institution itself. And an example I would think of is the police department in Minneapolis. And it was on the ballot for them to defund and begin to really reorganize the policing efforts there. And the voters did not pass the legislation that was put up. So these institutional risks are real and it become a huge barrier. So do we have time to chat some other barriers? It seems like now we were just going to invite you. I think we're a little behind on time, but if we're okay, let's do it. Invite you to enter into the chat other barriers that you may see in your institutions, and we'll just take a quick look at those.
And while people are chatting, then we'll just go into a breakout room where they can discuss what's resonating. Just for a few minutes. What barriers they may be coming up against, what's resonating for them.
Sally, should I share out some of the things I'm seeing in the chat?
If you would please, Grace.
Sure. Yep. So up, and I'm so sorry, I clicked the wrong button. Okay, so I'm seeing fear of failure to fix. Right. So failing to fix, and that the fear that we're not going to do that well. Prioritizing, intentionally building into the workday. Yep. Not wanting to be comfortable, not wanting to be uncomfortable with racism. Pushback from parental community. Yeah, this happens on all levels in the school, right? Offending, right? Offending or creating harm, right? Refusing to acknowledge it exists, right? That gatekeeping.
Okay.
There's a few more.
Yeah, not wanting to see themselves as not being an ally. Yep, not giving this the time at meetings and seeing it as a priority. Yes, lack of direction, sense of urgency from the leadership, right? Not making structural changes to deal with structural issues, not being valued. Yeah, thank you so much. No follow through. Yep. Not continuing the journey. Maybe starting, but not continuing on or deepening. Yep. Lip service and inaction. Yep. It's a sneaky way to create barriers there, to say we're doing something and not really do the actual things required. Dismissing it as irrelevant to academic success. We've done enough training, right? Yeah, that one comes up a lot. Okay, Sally.
Okay, so Toby, did you want to break out here?
No, I was off. We'll stick with this part.
Stick with it. Okay, so the next slide, just bringing us back to this idea that the truth is, right, as we absorb the enormity of these barriers, they're real, and I'm sure we recognize them. We clearly see everything really has to start in the middle and at the personal level. So Toby's going to walk us through some more of that now.
Thank you, Sally. And so we really, as we've been naming, we begin within. Go from there and begin within. Because yes, the institution is doing what the institution does, but what does this mean for us? And so we have this be-do framework. And the chat was really insightful in some of the offerings, well, in all of them really, but it was interesting just to name, that we've done enough training, blaming the system, not walking the talk. That is precisely why we have this be-do framework, because our own beingness, our mindset, our beliefs, our biases, the lens that we hold is what creates the relational and connected aspect. We think there's a doing to that. There's a technical piece of that. But that's just the doing of the being that exists. So if your policies, rules, systems, design, if all of that is not inclusive, and this might sting a little bit, it's because you're not inclusive. Because you cannot do what you do not be. And so, I mean, we've been here for decades doing DEI work and whatnot. And people, white people in particular, keep saying, just tell me what to do. Just tell me what to do. That's not going to work because we've got libraries full of books that will tell you what to do. But when the lens comes that dismisses educators of color that are sharing with you how to educate our kids of color, how to work with our families of color, and that is dismissed, that's because the lens and mindset and beliefs isn't valuing who's bringing it, who's offering it, and what it is it's going to take for the shift for you to do it. This work is an actual shift in your consciousness. It is a shift in your consciousness to be inclusive. After literally being raised in a society that has taught you that you don't have to be. You don't have to be, and you're going to be all right. Better than all right. And I have really come to the conclusion that it's not so much to eradicate a system of racism and to have a more inclusive society and system is not going to be about BIPOC and white people doing something together differently. It's really going to be about conscious white people shifting the minds of unconscious white people. Because I mean, to really own the power dynamic and the power structure that's really in charge and at play is not people of color. So when you can have a state like Florida make up a law and to offer that we don't want white people to be uncomfortable during Black History Month. Right, Cheryl? Where do we go with that? I mean, that's just insane to me. Now we have a law that can govern people's feelings, which is kind of like the laws BIPOC have kind of been asking for all along in an interesting way. So the irony of it is just amazing. But that's the depth of what we're talking about when we're talking about shifting an entire beingness, mindset, beliefs, lens in order for the policies, rules, and systems to look different. And so we offer that we have to look at this lens as, because your lens is how you shape and view the world. Like how you shape your experience is through your lens. And you have to own that because that's what is creating what your lived experience is. From this, as we explore that, we see the layers of our conditioning, the layers of how those institutional barriers have become a part of an acculturation. And that's the thing. Culture, this isn't just about people of color having a culture and white people having a culture. White dominant culture is in us all, like regardless of our racialized experience. We all have white ways. And generally, if you're a person of color and you're higher up in the professional echelon, if you will, you're doing white ways better than many. All right, Kitra, she's like, oh Lord. But yes, you're doing it. You're doing it better than most because that's what's acceptable and that's acculturation. So we're all in this together to shift the culture, but for the power structure to shift, not so much about us in the same kind of way. And so we offer to you all as mindfulness practitioners what we call awareing, why we sit in meditation to help us be more inclusive. Meditation, trust me, is not all the work. Don't get it twisted. This is the work that helps you manage the physiology of the discomfort. That's a Brene Brown term. I wish it were mine. The physiology of the discomfort is where the meditation comes in. It keeps you from succumbing to the habituated behaviors of white fragility and white privilege that are part of your conditioning. And for people of color, it often helps us not completely go off on y'all and keep some balance. Okay, get lighter, y'all. Y'all too serious. It's okay. We're gonna be all right. All right. Okay. So the awareness of what is arising right now, it's just holding that dual awareness of the inner landscape and the outer environment of what's happening so that you can witness your conditioning. When you can witness your conditioning, you can interrupt it. And so meditation provides this effortless combination of minimizing the amygdala, because the amygdala is what's going to create your white fragility. The insula is promoting your empathy and compassion. We think it's in the heart, but it starts in the brain, really. And then there's your prefrontal cortex, right? To keep you thinking clearly, to keep you online. Stay connected to the amygdala, because if those two disconnect, you are going to enact generally a level of harm. And I say that as a general you. Because for me, how this shows up for me as a Black woman leader, there's a certain amount of equanimity that I need to bring into the space. There's a certain amount of managing my own difficult emotions and frustrations and sometimes anger when doing this work that I know will not be effective if I show up in a certain way. But not only that, my racial stamina is high because it's not just showing up in a certain way, it's being able to stay in this work and not allow the frustration of this work to create such an emotional toll on my own self that I lose my wellness. And that's what racism does to people of color. We lose our wellness. That's why our lifespans are significantly shorter than those of white people in this society. But you look at other countries that are mostly populated by Black people, the lifespan is longer. Yes, and same with our brown brothers and sisters. Is this because this society is killing us? The stress of the racism. So this practice heals us and supports us. And we finalize this before some journaling of where the sacred pause comes in, because the green line, if you will, would be between reflecting and responding. The stop, breathe, notice, and reflect is all being. It's all in your way of being. That's your mindset and your action. Then you respond skillfully. Don't go into the habituated response. You go into the skillful response, which means if you know what your white fragility behaviors are, which is what we encourage people to do in our programs, you have to identify what your behaviors are, because then you know, you feel it when it's arising so that you can be conscious of it to bring it down. Don't create harm and trauma. And just that, when you bring it down, then you stay connected to the prefrontal cortex so you can stay into the learning. Because see, white fragility even takes you out of the learning. And then you miss the learning that's going to advance you for the advancement of those that we serve. Is that making sense? Okay, let's journal.
Thank you, Toby. So we're going to journal again, same way as before, and we will invite you to consider a couple of questions, reflect here privately, and then we'll invite you to reflect in small breakout rooms. Your first question here is to consider how your being currently affects your doing at work. So think about, in that context, at work, how is your being informing your doing? The way that you are affecting what you do. We will have about 1 minute, just to make sure we're preserving time to finish up on time today. So we'll have about 1 minute of quiet reflection time.
Grace, why don't we go total 3 minutes and just give them the other question too?
Okay, good idea. So additionally, you'll be considering this question. Considering the tools within your workplace already, within your workplace, using these new tools that we have been sharing in this workshop, what would it look like? So the idea of intentional connection, the sacred pause, awareing and meditation, contemplation, self-education, etc. So go ahead and journal on both of these questions for a total of 3 minutes, and you'll hear a bell if I can make it work at the end of the 3 minutes. About 1 minute remaining. All right, we're going to move into breakout rooms to reflect on what we just journaled about. So again, in these breakout rooms, just like the last ones, you'll share what arose in your journaling, share what you wish to share about that process for you. And I think we're in groups of about 3, might be a little different for each room, but we're, I think, aiming for 3, and we have 8 minutes in these rooms. So make sure to share the air with your colleagues in the space. Hey, hi, everyone, welcome back. We have about 8 or so minutes for a whole group share out again. So we invite you to share what came of that reflection, what came of that connection in the breakout rooms.
We talked about the process of being vulnerable and being willing to grow and not be so sensitive to someone saying something, but to be open, and that's how you grow. I talked about the fact of sometimes I would tell people, oh, that was a pinch. Let's talk about that. What you just said, or your statement or your action kind of pinched me. So, so let's talk about that. Let's process that.
Thank you so much, Rita. Feel free to type your name in the chat if you'd like to share something or unmute yourself now.
So I shared in my group, this is a struggle for me. It eats me up every day. We have 2 students that are from the same family, and they roam our halls a lot. I'm in a K-5 school. We are missing 2 administration right now. And I, every day, make it a point to try with both those students, one of which I used to have a relationship with before COVID, before we were virtual. I get eye contact, which is a big change in the past couple weeks. I've gotten eye contact from one of them. The other one continues to walk away. I am trying so hard to be they're communicating big time through their behaviors. And I am trying so hard to figure it out. But honestly, after a week of receiving nothing or feeling that disconnection I feel bad because I kind of let it go for a few days and then I try again. But today in this space, I feel so empowered to ask for help. I feel empowered to go to my administration and saying, this is not okay. These are kids that need us. They're communicating in a way that they have needs. What are those needs? Help me figure out how to move past this blankness, this non-responsive, this, so many of our staff in our building, I get frustrated with because they're like, oh, that's just who they are. And they've already given up on them. And I'm like, no, they're communicating something very powerful to us. And we need to have the patience to be present with it and figure it out. And nobody, including myself, is taking that energy to do that. I find it overwhelming. I find it frustrating. I find it what am I doing wrong? So this whole being and doing is huge in that moment when I am really set for my day and I've set my intention for the day. I will do more and push more with them. I just need help. I have had these kids since they were in kindergarten. I've had them in my groups. I've had connections with them in the past. And this disconnection and what's happening, it's moving me to tears today. It's just, our school is a big family. And those are 2 pieces of our family that are missing.
Thank you, Dina.
Can I
Thank you
just,
so
I
much
just,
for sharing that.
can I just say, Dina, when you were sharing that, what I heard is the beauty of, guess what? They're at school, right? So what I heard is they want to be there, right? So they're making a choice to be there. And then also, the grace, right? Allowing yourself that, guess what? You're part of a team. And so also it's who else on the team that might be able to connect with them? Because like you said, they're speaking and their choices, they made a choice to be there and they're making that choice. So that's what I saw as a beautiful thing. And then just who else on that team, right? Because they connect with someone, because they're coming. Then just reach out to some of those other team members.
Thank you. And it's a safe space for them. They don't live in a safe space, so it's a very safe space for them.
Yeah, thank you both. We have a couple minutes left.
I wrote it in the chat for Dina, but I'll say it out loud since we have some time left. But you know, sometimes you just have to go above and beyond and do what you have to do to make sure those students succeed. Like I put in the chat, I've been reprimanded before by administration for doing too much, but those students they graduated from my high school, they graduated from college, and they are successful citizens right now. And all because I did too much. So sometimes you take that reprimand and keep going. You know, and if I don't want to say that maybe that's not the place for you because you said that's a family, you guys are a family. So maybe you can just sit down and have that talk and say, look, this is what I'm going to do with these two babies. These two babies are my priority now, and this is what I'm going to do to make sure they succeed. Because that's what we do here at my school. You know, when those certain students connect with us, especially those that we know this is their safe haven, this is where they feel comfortable. And if it's only one of us that they connect with, then they become ours and we make sure they succeed. So, you know, sometimes we have to step outside of our own box to make sure that our babies get what they need because they are definitely our priority.
Thank you, Ms. Shalise.
You're
I
welcome.
also want to offer into the space, particularly for Dina, but I think it goes without saying too. One thing that can be is definitely don't take it personal, could have nothing to do with you because it's been a shift. And so it could be, you know, a season versus the whole deal. And so one, not to take it personal. Two, don't stop trying because we just never know. And also, you know, from their own recollection, they'll remember that you didn't stop trying. And the other is, you know, I believe in the being before the doing. And so I would do some loving kindness meditation towards them. And just let the energy of that positivity do a lot more of the efforting than you are in the physical. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for the depth of sharing and the connection with each other and the support.
Thank you, Grace, and thank you, Sally, both. I'm representing the trio as we close out at this point. And, you know, we hope that you've really enjoyed this time together. As you can see, the work is emotionally rigorous and also very rooted in an embodiment practice framing and lens. Most of the work that is happening around equity and inclusion doesn't look like this in our institutions. So we really are looking to grow this approach, and we invite you all to look at some of our free resources on our website. And one is the free ebook around creating the racial autobiography. I don't recommend doing this with kids until you've done it as an adult with other adults first, and because you cannot teach what you do not embody. So it's important to take yourself through the process. Cheryl's done it. A few other folks in the space have done their racial healing autobiographies, and they're really, really powerful. They're healing and transformational for yourself, but also they cultivate empathy and connection to others. So when you do it with another group, your family, friends, colleagues, it's just a beautiful unfolding that happens. and a learning and unlearning. And it creates connection. We also have some free meditations there that are particularly around allyship and a racialized experience. And so to do some inner exploration there, and then journaling. And we have a new course that's coming out. Our signature course will not be out again until the fall. We're in the middle of it now, and it's now longer, and just really we're about transformation. So we really decided to forego some of the other shorter ones. This one is around practicing peace in hard conversations. Om is misspelled on purpose, but the energy of the word itself and the pronunciation, we're enjoying that interplay with open hearts and mouths. Because as we've explored even here today, it's one thing to feel it, but we know that we have to take some action, right? We're being a noun and a verb. So that is going to be starting soon. And we want to have the opportunity to close out, and we're going to end on time. What a beautiful thing. With our creed. We always close in a way that creates connection, because again, things come up for people in this space. And so the way you begin and the way you end are very important, very, very important in having a healing and trauma-informed lens. So we just invite you to listen to this creed. You can sit, whatever's comfortable for you. You can place a hand on your heart if you choose, whatever feels right for you. But I just say for us, on behalf of us all, community of healing today, may the light of our healing, your flame meeting mine, my flame meeting yours, bring peace, renew the places we share, and strengthen the light shining within us through us all. Thank you so much for showing up and for being here today.